Greetings everyone, peace to you all.
Welcome, gentle sirs.
Welcome to another episode of Praiseworthy Reviews, where we go through video games to see if they are excellent and commendable. Today, we will be reviewing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the second installment to the modern reimagining of the 1997 JRPG classic by Square Enix. Rebirth only covers the middle third of the original Final Fantasy VII, following the protagonist from Midgar to that one confrontation with Sephiroth that everyone remembers from the original. Players play as the mercenary Cloud Strife and his companions as they seek to defeat Sephiroth before he can execute his plan to rule over the planet.
She may be new, but she's still a Turk, and a consummate professional.
As usual, we will be evaluating the game based on 5 criteria: fun factor, educational value, cultural value, spiritual value, and cost. For context, prior to this review, I have played Final Fantasy VI to Final Fantasy X2, including the PC version of Final Fantasy VII. I did finish and review Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, and I have finished this game to the credits. Regarding the technical state of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I played the PC version, and the frame drops and stuttering were significantly worse than Remake Intergrade. This was compounded by the fact that even when the game was running at 30 frames per second, sometimes it was struggling to do so, and much of my recording was unusable, even at 1080p with the lowest settings. In other words, this might be the worst optimized game I have ever played for the channel, but I'll discuss that a little more later on. For now, without further ado, let's jump in. Just like the first entry, Remake Intergrade, the core gameplay elements of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth consist of combat, exploration, and minigames. Combat is mostly the same as Remake, with its turn-based active time battle system. Combat is still the hybrid of the turn-based original combined with the more action RPG systems, with battles and exploration taking place in the same environment. As before, players use basic attacks, special attacks, blocks, and dodges to fill ATB gauges. Although ATB gauges are incredibly important, movement, blocking, and dodging are all skills that are quite vital to minimizing damage taken. Once your ATB gauge is filled, players can select actions from the classic Final Fantasy menu, such as spells, items, and abilities to use. Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barret play more or less the same as before, with similar styles and weapons, but the game introduces 3 new playable characters with their own combat styles. Red 13 has an aggressive melee self-healing style of play. Yuffie plays like an intermission, both melee and ranged, with a wide variety of elemental abilities. And Cait Sith plays, well, as weirdly as you might expect if you played the original. The pressured and staggered mechanics return and are basically unchanged from the first entry, allowing players to do extra damage or take advantage of special vulnerabilities from enemies. Enemy variety is a little better than the first game, with a wide range of monsters, including Shinra soldiers. Bosses and mini-bosses are similar to the first game, challenging and serviceable, but not particularly memorable or annoying. For the most part, I think the bosses are well-tuned, solid challenges that may be able to take you out if you try to defeat them without really engaging with the systems, but not too difficult if you know what you're doing, like managing boss pressuring and staggering. The newest thing about combat is probably the synergy abilities, where teammates can synchronize attacks together. It's not like mind-blowingly innovative, but it feels like having one more ultimate tool in your pocket besides limits and summons. Rebirth progression is slightly different than the first game, but still similar. Players can acquire new weapons, armor, and accessories as you might expect. Weapons still level up, granting the character stat bonuses and different abilities when equipped, although the way that this is done is a little bit different than before. Materia functions in almost identical ways as Remake, but in Rebirth there is a lot more access to materia slots, so managing them feels a little bit different. The aspect of progression that is most important is probably the new Folio skill tree system, which allows players to unlock passive and active abilities based on SP gained when leveling up. Overall, combat feels pretty engaging and fun, even if it is largely the same as the first game. Rebirth does refresh the way that it does exploration. There are still nooks and crannies to explore for treasure chests. However, for better or worse, there is now all the typical Ubisoft open world stuff to do. Do the open world tasks feel a little bit better with a Final Fantasy skin on them? Actually, a little bit. As someone who doesn't like open world gameplay, it was actually a little bit more engaging to me than many open world games, even though functionally the gameplay is very standard fare. Maybe it's because you can ride around on chocobos, which makes it less tedious. There are random open world activities to do, but honestly, most of them didn't interest me. The quest system is back with a lot of optional, boring fetch quests. Like the first entry, some of the quests have pretty good character development, especially ones with the companion icons on them. To me, the most striking thing about Rebirth's gameplay was the minigames. Most of the minigames from the first game return, like the VR simulator, the rhythm-based exercise games, Fort Condor, and motorcycle riding. However, there are a plethora of new minigames littered throughout the planet of Rebirth, especially in Costa del Sol and of course the Gold Saucer. Queen's Blood is a card game that I enjoyed quite a bit throughout the early part of Rebirth. I also enjoyed trying to play piano through a controller, especially the classic songs like Tifa's theme or Aerith's theme. There are also a bunch of weird minigames like the pirate shooting game, Red 13's Rocket League game, and perhaps my favorite, Chocobo Racing. Despite my concern that everything would feel samey from Remake, Rebirth manages to feel fresh and fun, earning from me 5 stars for fun factor. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth maintains the same amount of educational value as the first entry. As before, there isn't really any factual or conceptual knowledge to learn from the game. However, motor skills still do matter. Good dodging and blocking, which I wasn't great at, is something that can really go a long way in keeping the player alive. As before, there's a lot of strategy in the ATB system. Knowing when to use abilities, limits, summons, and now even synergy abilities can be the key difference between an easy victory and a horrible defeat. The strategies and how you equip weapons and materia are still there, with the added depth of the folio skill investment and how you want that to synergize with your preferred party and materia. The difficulty and educational value of the game is very similar to the first game, but a little bit more innovative. So overall, I'm going to give the game 4 stars for educational value. The cultural value of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is where the game suffers quite a bit from its technical difficulties. The beautiful landscapes suffer from textures popping in and out. The expressive characters, quite emotional and moving in one scene, are visually stuttering in the next. Combat animations are quite cool and what you expect them to be, especially after playing the first game, yet it can be difficult to appreciate them with the inconsistent performance. The UI remains basically the same from the first game, which is to say pretty bland, but I guess that's a retro stylistic choice. As before, the music is comprised almost entirely of new arrangements of the original songs, but it does feel like there is a wide selection of new variations of those classic tracks, again skillfully leveraging nostalgia.
I don't want your sympathy or your pity. You can keep all of that nonsense. I did what I did, and I can live with it.
Barrett remains my favorite voice actor of the main team, and surprisingly, Yuffie and Cait Sith, both of whom I barely used in the classic game, are a lot less annoying in this game. The plot is still simplistic given its journey around the world archetype, but the writers do a surprisingly good job of developing character relationships and highlighting important themes. The game brings to life the cultures and environments of the different distinct areas, not just Costa del Sol and the Gold Saucer, but the military nature of Junon or the mining ghost town of North Corel. I know this is controversial, but I actually like the multiple timelines gimmick because it allows the writers to be incredibly faithful to the original game while still making subtle changes for the sake of tightening the story and to keep the player guessing. The ending was okay, not what I wanted it to be. The one thing I particularly disliked about the story was the overall pacing. There are an excessive number of times in the story where Cloud and gang are frustrated from their goals, forced to do one more random thing for a stranger in order to progress, which was jarring and disrupting to the flow.
Good thing his jockey's on the job. Pico needs food, and you're gonna find it.
Fine.
Even at the time of recording a little over a year after release, Square Enix has been a little cagey with the sales numbers, often stating that Rebirth is a top download, or the most sold in Japan, or the most sold in the US, without any definitive numbers. Of course, the third game, the conclusion of the trilogy, has been announced, with no release date, but expected by analysts in 2027. Overall, while I appreciated the fresh visuals outside Midgar and the overall artistic vision, honestly, the technical difficulties kept breaking my immersion and making the elements difficult to enjoy. With that in mind, I'm going to assign Final Fantasy VII Rebirth 3 stars for its cultural value. As far as the negative content of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is concerned, there is quite a bit. There's less smoking than the first game, but the alcohol is still there, with some quests taking place in a bar. There is still sexualization of the female characters, and even of Cloud in their beach swimwear. There is vulgar language throughout, even from the protagonists. While the protagonists are still considered avalanche and terrorists, There is little or no terrorism in Rebirth, removing my main issue with the negative content in the first game. There's positive content in the game as well, with plenty of portrayals of friendship through difficult times.
Thank God we found you. We were worried.
There's plenty of allusions to the Bible and to spiritual concepts such as salvation, the promised land, and atonement. ESRB rates this as T for teen, which I feel is quite reasonable. In my opinion, the themes of Rebirth are generally positive. For more analysis on the themes of the game, check out my upcoming biblical themes videos for this game. Overall, I'm going to give Rebirth 4 stars for spiritual value. I think the cost of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is quite good for a AAA title. For the time poor, the main story can be completed in about 50 hours. For the time rich, there is plenty of optional content. You can do open world activities like climbing towers, finding Mako Springs, or digging for treasure with chocobos. You can do optional quests, many of which I ignored, but some of which are relatively interesting. And of course, there are endless mini-games littered throughout the planet. Rebirth retails for $49.99 USD and can sometimes be found for about 40% off, which I think is solid value. Overall, based on the content value, narrative accessibility, and asking price, I'm going to give the game 4 stars for cost. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth does a successful job of maintaining the framework laid out by the first game while breathing new life into the combat, exploration, and minigames. It maintains the sexualization and objectification of women, but it mostly removes the terrorism issues. Even with the slow progression in certain parts of the game, each area introduced new surprises, humorous situations, and moving story arcs to keep the player engaged. However, the technical blemishes cannot be ignored. As I mentioned, it was difficult to work around this, and I wanted to assign the game a higher score than I did, but ultimately the performance flaws were too great to ignore. Until they make significant improvements to the performance, based on the criteria discussed in the video, I subjectively assign Final Fantasy VII Rebirth the rating of Sales Selection.
Be safe, you guys.
That's all I have for you in this video. Bless you guys.
Bon voyage.
Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If this video blessed you in some way, please consider watching some of my other videos, subscribing, sharing this video with a friend, or sharing with me some of your thoughts in the comments below.